of our International Forum of Composers. Now we have some guests from Britain. Our old friend from the first edition of the forum, Tim Benjamin, is here. Now I will he will introduce us in his new symphony. Last time he presented some of his specialties, chamber operas, and now Tim, please some thoughts about your last work, this large-scale symphonic fresque.
You can call it a symphony. That's the idea. Yeah.
Yes, the 4 movements, and some other thoughts, please.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Dan. So, some of you came to see the concert just now. So you've heard this. Do you know what any of this? Can you hear this? Yeah. Good. Right. I saw Harrison Birtwistle do something, and they gave him a microphone to speak, and he just started scratching his head with a couple of things. So, yeah, I was here in, I've been here several times. So I was here in 2019 for the festival, and they played a piece of my music, and I came and I spoke here with you, and went out for dinner with someone who is here today afterwards, and I said, you know, tell me something about, I've been walking all around Bucharest, and I saw this people's palace. This large building, you would say. Tell me the story, why this was built, when this was built. And she told me all about the destruction of the district underneath it, because it's a hill, you know all this, you know the story. So this district of Uranus, which was destroyed. And having spent 2 days just walking all around Bucharest, seeing all the buildings, seeing people, getting to know some people, it just hit me very hard, this story. Because you can see some buildings, you can see kind of layers underneath, you can see how things are built. You can see old buildings, you can see new, you can see kind of the concrete buildings, all of this. So it hit me quite hard. And I'd also had a long conversation with Mr. Constantinescu, the festival director, and he said, we can do something. Do a big project together. And he said, yeah, you go and do it, you do it. We'll have a big piece, you can do what you like. Which is great to hear for a composer, do what you like. And so I thought, I want to write something about that. And so the result was the symphony that you heard today. And what I wanted to get to in this story was not so much a tale of, a straightforward tale of destruction or something like this. I wanted to think about the ideas, the memories and the stories that the people had that lived in this Uranus district. What happens, they're probably still around, some of these people, they're still alive. They still have memories of this district, they have the stories. So I thought, well, maybe there's music that they used to play. Can I conjure that up somehow? And then can I depict what happens to an idea, what happens to a culture when powerful people want to stop it? Wants to stop an idea. Very hard to stop an idea. Once an idea happens, you can't unhave an idea. They spread. So that was the essence of this piece. So it starts off with this open A string on the violin, and that's kind of this germ of an idea appearing, and then we get everything that you heard, and then at the end we get again just the open A string. And did we just imagine all of that? Or is this something new in this open A string? I don't know, but I want to talk to you a bit about stories. I've just written some thoughts down. Why do we tell stories? Why do we tell stories to each other as a culture? Every culture on the planet, for as long as there have been humans, they have told stories to each other. It's a very powerful thing. There is a kind of an evolutionary basis to this, to stories. Before we settled down as humans in our, villages and all of this, we hunted, we gathered, And we were quite aggressive. We're still quite aggressive now, honestly. We're quite aggressive as a species now, but we were probably more aggressive then, more wild. And once we put that behind us and we settled down in towns, the ones who were successful were not so much the ones who could go and catch and be hunters. The ones who were successful were the ones who could trade, who could persuade people. And so it began to take root in our being that the ones who could tell stories in some way were successful. And so as evolution happens, the whole concept of stories being something fundamental to humans settling down, it grew. And they call this self-domestication of the human species, self-domestication. So we know about domestication of dogs, for example. They go from a wolf to a dog. When wolves became dogs over thousands of years, their brains shrank in size by about 10%. It's interesting, isn't it? And you know, in the 1,000 generations that humans have self-domesticated since that time, our brains have shrunk by about 10% as well. Which is interesting. You might think our brains might have grown, but no, they've got smaller, just the same amount as a dog, a wolf's brain became a dog. So we kind of exist on this plane of reality, of what is essential for our survival. So for dogs, they live in a world of smell. Smell is essential for their survival, so their brain is highly tuned to understanding smells. For moles, moles under the ground, for them it's touch. And for humans, I think it's other minds. So understanding other minds is the thing which gives us our great success. That's the plane of reality that we live on, is understanding and communicating with other humans, other minds. So, our brains don't really tell us the truth in the world. Our eyes and our hands and our ears, they're imperfect. We don't get, it's not like a computer or a camera, It's imperfect. So we get a kind of a filtered version of the real world, and our brain makes up the rest. So the reality that we perceive is not probably a true reality. It's not a logic, essential thing like that. It's a perception. So we need some way to make sense of this, and our brains have evolved to use the idea of a story to make sense of what's inside. Inside this spherical thing on our bodies, which is dark and silent inside, and outside there's this huge, deadly world, which we have to kind of understand what it is, what's the kind of point of our existence. And so we use this idea of story. Our brains make up stories. The structure of stories, the beginning, the middle, the end, it's all done in our brains. So this idea of stories, I think, is fundamental. Now, why am I telling you this? Why indeed? Right. So I think composers have a part to play in this. Think about what can a story do, and why do we tell stories as well? We want to, three things, I've written down three things. We want to persuade, we want to explain or teach, and we want to remember, or we want to help other people remember what happened in the past. So persuade, which could be, or also provoke, that comes under persuasion, and to explain or teach, and to remember. And there's a big part of early stories, epic stories, like the Edda, there's the Chanson de Roland, for example, if you know this, Gilgamesh, Beowulf, these great poetic epics. They have a lot in common. I mean, they tend to start kind of in the middle of things. They tend to have a hero's journey very often. They're also constructed of lots of short scenes, each of which has its own little structure, each little story. So that's how you can kind of remember it. There's a huge one. The great example I've written down is the Kyrgyz epic poem is called Manas, their national epic. It's been around for thousands of years. It's 500,000 lines long. And there are these people called Manashi. The Manashi is responsible for telling the Manas. And they enter into a kind of a trance state when they do this, and try to remember as many of the 500,000 lines as they can. And they use narration, they use rhythm, they use tone, almost singing, they use gestures, all of these tools at their disposal to tell this epic story of what it is, their national origin story. So these epic stories, they transcend generations, they're heroic, they're built from short episodes, and I think this leads me to epic theatre. we jump a few thousand years to the world of Brecht and others. Epic theatre. Familiar with epic theatre? What are we trying to do in epic theatre? And I'm getting to why I compose. That's what I'm getting to. What I try to do as a composer. One thing we like to do is to provoke the audience. What I like to do in epic theatre, anyway. We like to provoke the audience. We don't want to let them. We could just entertain them. Brecht called this culinary theatre. So culinary theatre is just like a nice meal. And that was it. And he didn't want to do that. He wanted to do epic theatre, something else, to disturb minds and to force you to. You can't sit back and just watch and imagine this is a world happening outside of you. It's happening. You're in this world that he's showing you. So he always wants to break the fourth wall. So he talks to people directly. And the characters will kind of walk on and say, do I want to go that way, or do I want to go to? Am I happy, or am I sad? And they would tell you what's in their mind. So you have to decide. You can't just simply sit back and let the theatrical experience come over you. Am I happy? They do things like this. And so he's forced to kind of choose what he thinks. So for me, this is a big thing in music. Can you break this fourth wall? Can I talk directly to people? So they can't just sit back and be entertained, by the story I'm telling them. Can I make them take responsibility for it somehow, to exist in the world that I'm showing them, which is their world. I'm telling a story about their world that they're in. So we have this alienation effect, and I've tried to do this in a number of ways. In opera, it's a bit easier because you can have a singer comes on. In fact, I did an opera which was set in 17th century, something like this, with a highwayman, which is a thief that robs people in the road. And so it starts off, and we just see very, very dark theatre, and we just see candles and a barrel. We're in a cellar. And then there's a big bang door at the back. This is after the lights have come down, and the lights on the stage come up, and we hear the door bangs at the back, and we hear this noise of someone kind of barging in. We go, someone has arrived late, and they're making all this noise. That's really rude. This happens sometimes, doesn't it? In concerts, someone arrives late and they slam the door and they're coughing. But I used, this was the actor who came on this way. So it forces everyone, they think they're not allowed to be in this world just to sit back and see it. This is someone who's come in the theatre and just, they all turn around and go, sorry. So this is an alienation effect that I tried to use. So today with the symphony, the open A string at the beginning, this is a bit like this as well. Similar idea. So trying to do this distancing effect without, actors to do it for you. So it was kind of a bit of a joke in a way. Is she tuning up? Is she still tuning up? Can we still clock? Can I still check my phone? Or has the piece started? So we don't know. So we're forced to relate directly with what we're seeing. We can't just sit back and be entertained. So persuade, explain, and remember. So this is what I try to, what we can do. As storytellers. So yeah, I think a composer is a kind of a storyteller. It is not kind of, it is a storyteller. And we have chosen this medium of music and some drama as well to tell our stories. So if that's true, and we think about the storytellers of a long time ago who started thinking of the epic tales, the epic poems, they had a role in society, an important role, because those epic poems, they're telling people things they must not forget, important things, with characters around them, but important lessons around them that must not be forgotten. So it's much easier. You can remember a story. You can remember a story. There's probably lots of stories, I don't know the Romanian kids' stories, but in England we have stories of Three Little Pigs, for example, or we have the story of the Red Riding Hood. That must be universal. Yeah. So there's a wolf that's dangerous, and we learn that in the forest there's wolves and they're dangerous. So it's simple things like this, but the epic poems are much bigger. So as a composer, we can do much more than entertain. We can persuade people, we can provoke people to think something new. We can explain why something is, and we can, and we can make people remember, like hopefully I've done in my piece today. We can remember what, culturally we can remember. None of us, I suppose, were there in the Renaissance, but we can kind of culturally remember. So yeah, that's what I see. A composer is a storyteller. It's a role. It's an important role that we can have in society. We can do much more. We can write. We can be in a small room with a piano or a computer, and we can write. but it's fundamentally important. There are composers here, you are composers? Student composers? Yeah?
Yes, some of them.
Brilliant.
Here, there.
So when you go out into the world, we do much more than just write some music and hide in place a studio. We have an important role to play, to tell these stories, to interpret the world for people in their dark, inside this ball of skull on their head that's dark and silent. And we mediate what is in the world for them, as epic storytellers perhaps. So we have a role in society, we have to do lots of different things as composers. We can just write, but we also have to be entrepreneurs. We have to communicate with people, we have to be impresarios sometimes. We have to put the concerts on, we have to organize, we have to be administrators. And we have to be salespeople as well. That's the interesting thing. I don't want to go into sales, I'm not going to sell people a car or something like this. If you deal with other people, which we all do as musicians, if you deal with other people, you are basically in sales. There's no disagreement about this. You're a salesperson. And it's, and you do this by telling your stories. And so, there we go. And we persuade, and we explain, we teach, we provoke, and we remember. All of these things. So my part, I've got a motto which sustains me. So I'll finish. I'll just tell you this little story and I'll finish. This motto. So there was a young man. There was a young man, and he was a long time ago, before Christ. He was a kind of respected military figure in his world. His father was a general and ruler of his people, and went over the sea and went to war against Rome, and he was killed. So the son became the general of the army, and he said, so they lost the first war, the first Punic War, if you know where I'm going. So he said, I'm going to go back, and I'm going to teach the Romans a lesson. I'm going to go and I'm going to defeat Rome, which was a difficult thing to do, a bit like saying I'm going to write a new symphony for a festival, a difficult thing to say. So he said, I'm going to go to Rome and I'm going to defeat them, and I'm going to take 40,000 soldiers from North Africa, and I'm going to go not land on the side of Italy. I'm going to go up. I'm going to go up to Spain, and I'm going to walk all the way around the bottom of France. I'm going to make friends with the Gauls, who don't like me, and then I'm going to cross the Alps with my 40,000 men, my 8,000 horses, and my 40 elephants. And so he did. Only 8 elephants made it, but he crossed over, and he defeated Rome for 10 years. He was, he could have pushed further. He could probably have defeated Rome entirely, but he caused big problems. But anyway, you know who this is? Hannibal. And what he said, his thing which guided him, and I like it because it helps me, and all the difficult things that you have to do as a composer to try to get your story told, to tell people. He said, I shall either find a way or I shall make one. So I think the thing we do as composers very often is sometimes we find a way, very often we have to make a way to tell our story. That's what I have to say. I hope that was interesting.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tim, for your inspired speech. And now I invite Patrick House in order to choose the format. If you want to speak like him to us about your concerto, piano concerto, if you are comfortable to have a chat with me, it's up to you.
We'll talk.
Okay.
So, hello everybody. I would like us both to look forwards and look backwards as composers. I want you to imagine it is not the year 2021, but the year, say, 2121, in this very room. And there are people here who are going to speak and ask questions. What sort of thing would be said then, and what sort of questions would be asked then, if they were going to look forwards and look backwards. Well, I believe if they look backwards 100 years to September 2021, they would say the composers of that time were very important. They were very important because they witnessed, finally, something that had to happen, and that is the demise of modernism. You cannot, in history, have a Renaissance period, a Baroque period, a classical period, of course with sub-periods of mannerism and pre-classical and high Baroque, but basically Renaissance, Baroque, classical, romantic, modern, modern, postmodern, postmodern, modern, modern. It can't happen. There has to be a change, and there has to be a change dramatic enough for modernism to end. So, I find myself thinking about this a lot as a composer. And when I first heard about the coronavirus in January 2020, I just sensed, with my slightly sort of mystical approach to life, that this was very important. Not just as a disease that would disable humanity for a few years, but to me, there was something important that this was happening in the first month of 2020. And it was at that point I realized that we, you and me and our families are living at the beginning of the third decade of the third millennium. And I think in 100 years' time, people sitting here will be saying things like, gosh, we think about the 21st century. Well, we think about the demise of modernism. And we can see in that amazing decade, which began with the coronavirus and ended with, we don't know. But I bet you, they say within that decade, modernism died. Let me talk a little bit about my philosophy of music and being a composer. And that in turn, very importantly, involves a looking back. Mankind, the human being, has two creative engines. It has the mind, the brain. But it also has the soul. And if you look back, as we all must and should, again and again and again, especially if you are a composer, look back to Gregorian chant. Because Gregorian chant is the seed of all Western music. Be it Beethoven, be it Bach, be it the Beatles, be it ABBA. None of that would have existed without Gregorian chant. It is what gave rise to organum, and then of course the 2-part polyphony, 3-part polyphony, to the 40-part motet of Tallis, quite quickly. But what's more important than that is that we need to realize, we do need to realize, that people of that period, and composers of that period, who were people of that period, wrote and sang music from their soul. The seed of all our music did not grow out of the mind. It grew out of a monk, or a series of monks, who rather than say pater noster, in Chaili, or Chelo, whatever it is, at different times, they would sing it, pray it together. Pater Noster, yes? To a correct rhythm and melody. People of centuries ago did not view the world like you or me. Art to them was something completely different. If they sang a setting of a mass by Josquin, they did not sing it, they prayed it. If we sing a Josquin mass today, do we pray it? A large work of mine, which was performed 2 years ago, the Great War Symphony, I was very lucky to have the National Youth Choir of Great Britain singing. Fantastic, one of the best youth choirs in the world. And I went to their rehearsal, they'd been rehearsed, and they sang for me a setting of a poem called The Dead Soldier, written by an unknown World War I poet. They wanted to show me that they had grasped my music and that all will be well, because I was going to be conducting them in the concert. So they sang it to me perfectly. And looked at me and there was silence. And I said, is there anyone among the 150 of you who can tell me what that poem was about? How many put up their hand? No. If you'd have asked a choir in the year 1660 who was singing a Josquin Mass, what have you just sung about? I said to the National Youth Choir, excuse me, how dare you do the disservice of learning this music, intending to convey it to an audience with not one iota of understanding of what this piece is about? If you don't understand it, how are they going to understand it? The year after, I worked with a choir in America on one of my choral pieces. And in America, they understood what I was trying to say far more than if I'd have said it in England. But I said to them, it was a piece called The Heart of Mary, about Mary's tribulations through life, of which there were many. And I asked them, they sang it to me, it was very beautiful. I said, now pray this piece, pray it. Even if you're not a Christian, try and pray it from deep within. And the performance was, I wish I could have recorded them, completely different. Now, why do I say all this? How does all this fit together? Well, it fits together because I think if you are young composers living in 2021, you're automatically, because of the world you live in, going to be focused in the mind, whether or not you have a religious belief. And I think you have to realize that modernism will die. And I think you have to realize that there sooner or later has to be a redressing within human creative people of the body and the soul. Of course, it all started to go wrong in my eyes, though of course, sure, I'm all ready for, always for people to disagree with me. This is me. I'm not saying it's gospel fact. I believe it with every fibre of my body. But I believe it all started to go wrong with the Enlightenment. Because until then, the soul and the mind were harnessed one with the other. Until then, the soul harnessed the mind. It's rather like Mozart said that wonderful thing about words and music, that poetry must be the obedient daughter of music. I believe that the mind must be the obedient daughter of the soul. Of course you have to use the mind to learn and to experiment and to do exercises and to stretch your vocabulary. But you will only find a true voice as a composer if you engage the soul. You think of our spoken voice. We all have our own voice. There are some people who don't like their own voice and try to change it, and it becomes an artificial voice. I know several people like that. The same is true of your musical voice. If we're talking about speaking, think of the mind and the soul. You can speak with the mind. Let me think. If I want to get back to my hotel, then I need to go out here. I think I need to turn right. If I don't turn right, I can ask somebody. My mind is using words here. Now let my soul speak to you. Okay, this is me. This is my soul, not yours, nobody else's. But I'm going to try and use words now to speak from my other creative engine. Okay, I'll say this. Lord Jesus Christ, I adore you. And I believe that you are the source of all beauty and truth. Now there, my mind was harnessed. It was put in its place. I think I need to stop. But that is the person I am, and that is the composer I am. And these are the questions I ask myself. And to be honest, if people don't like it, then that's fine. But I bet you, and I am a betting man, I like a bet on the horses, I bet you, if you could scroll forward in a time machine 100 years, people would look back on the third decade of the third millennium as the demise of modernism. Thank you.
Thank you, Patrick Howes, for this very powerful statement. And please, let's have a water and coffee break. Thank you. Thank you for accepting to join our roundtable, Peter Jablonski and Roman Gamba. I will provoke you abruptly, because the two speeches before were so full of content and so emotional that I really was also provoked, and I will provoke you. Peter Jablonski, your approach to the piano concerto of Patrick Howes. Tell us about your experience with this music and facing also the powerful personality of Patrick Howes.
Very powerful. Yes, well, Patrick and I, it's probably just over 2 years ago now, introduced by a mutual friend. I have always, well, almost always throughout my career been interested in finding composers whose music has not been performed so much. I've very been happy to look in the darker corners of the repertoire, if it's, Kilar or Szymanowski or Stanchinsky or the lesser-known works of famous composers, but also to work with composers of today. I think it's one of our duties as performers, and almost like a moral duty to support the music being written today. Otherwise, where is it going to end up, like Patrick said, in 100 years? So we were introduced. I was looking for some kind of piece, not necessarily piano concerto. And luckily, it seemed like Patrick had been thinking about a piano concerto for quite a while. I think there was one brewing inside of him. So Patrick came and visited us in Sweden, and we spent some really wonderful, wonderful days talking about music, talking about cats, drinking a little bit of wine here and there, sitting in front of the fire in southern Sweden, and the decision was made. I mean, it's Patrick's decision completely that he was going to write a piano concerto. I, on purpose, did not want to be involved or dictate anything. I wanted Patrick to be completely free to write what he wanted to write. I only said that if it's too difficult, I will let you know. So some of it was almost too difficult, but I didn't let him know. So I just decided to practice extra. And I was very, very happy with the result, of course, when I was. It's so clear how it's so, you heard him speak, it's so Patrick, it's so honest too. And I was, well, in my performing career, I worked quite a bit with modern composers, and very often it's in a language that can be maybe a little bit alien to yourself or overly complicated for their own good. Maybe it's almost too difficult to play. I've premiered pieces that needed 6 metronomes on the piano ticking in different speeds. It's very interesting, but it didn't really work. So in Patrick's case, I was very happy to see it's almost like a classical concerto in a way, you know, the romantic tradition of piano concerto. I remember he said he wanted to have an opening statement like the Emperor Concerto when we sat and talked about it. It ended up being more like the 4th Beethoven Concerto in a way, the opening. And Patrick, of course, you know, he really works in harmony and melody and rhythm, and I was very happy with the result, and it's been wonderful to be here. And with Rumon, who did such a wonderful work with the orchestra, that we gave birth to a new piano concerto. It's not a small thing for a composer to say, or like Tim, I'm going to write a symphony. It's not that I'm going to write a little piece for strings, or Patrick wrote a piano concerto. So it's quite a thing to be part of. I'm very honored to have done it.
Thank you for your answer. In this series of music of 21st century, we have 3 piano concertos. Already last week we have heard the piano concerto by Dieter Amann, a very different piano concerto by Patrick Haas, and tomorrow we will have also a piano concerto by Martin Torp from Berlin. So it's a very colorful range of contemporary piano concerti. Rumon, how was your work with Timișoara Philharmonic Orchestra? Last 2 years ago, you conducted also the same orchestra, and of course, your commentary is a little bit for all the 3 pieces. Maestro Georgescu, unfortunately, died some months ago. I think 2 or 3 months ago, and couldn't attend, of course, the concerto.
It's very interesting to me coming to an orchestra that is unfamiliar with the music. Of course, they're unfamiliar with it because it hasn't been performed before. Only the Georgescu was, and that they had played. But Patrick's and Tim's music, they one doesn't often know where to begin as an orchestra. And coming from the UK, we are so used to orchestras being very fast and immediately reading very well a new repertoire. So it takes a little bit longer in outside of the UK. I'm not going to say specifically Romania because everywhere. So it's interesting for me to start to learn the piece by teaching it to the orchestra, if you like. And it's interesting for me to take that time to find out what makes the music tick. And usually what makes the music tick makes the orchestra tick along as well. So it's finding those moments and trying to help the musicians to understand the language, both of Patrick's and of Tim's, which is something they are quite unfamiliar with. So it takes rather a lot of work, but it's rewarding work to hearing these pieces. You know, you sort of start off and then it becomes more and more and more clear, and it becomes clear the direction we want to take as artists in order to present this music as clearly as possible, because both Patrick and Tim write extremely carefully. It's not broad brush. it's very detailed, and you know, pretty much if you do what they've written, it works. Which, you know, in the UK they will play what's written, but sometimes you have to put some music in there as well. But here they take time to play what's written, I have to say. But so you try to find the atmosphere for each section, and then what is written eventually is sort of magnetically drawn to the atmosphere, shall we say? But no, it's been a very interesting week, and it's been nice having. It's always nice having composers to help. Love to ask Beethoven a few questions.
Thank you. Tim, how was your time in last year, in the pandemic, I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, your composing process.
Well, is this on? Yeah. Just scratch my head.
It's on.
Yeah, it's been it was a difficult time, actually. That's a stupid thing to say. Of course, it was a difficult time, but for me, when this happened, so you know, March, we started to have this lockdowns and isolations, and then rehearsals getting cancelled, concerts getting cancelled, work stopping. I mean, to be honest, with work, I've been extremely lucky in the last year. It's been good. But many of my friends, for example, very, very, very good mezzo-soprano who sang in one of my operas in 2019, 2020, she's stacking shelves in a supermarket. Nothing wrong with that, but it's not what she's learnt to do. She's not what she's dedicated her life to do. And so, particularly for me, this silencing of singers. I don't know what happened in Romania, but in the UK, there's been some. Well, we can be critical. You know, we weren't the ones who had to make the decisions, but stopping people from singing, I think, is one of the most cruel things that's happened in this time. So anyway, for me, I had a difficult time in mentally in March and April. You know, I was confined in a very nice place. I live in the countryside, so that was okay, and I had walks, but not being able to play with other musicians or even see other musicians had some kind of quite difficult effect on me. So that when we were allowed out a little bit, I was able to do some projects, and we did a couple of albums, of recorded some stuff with people, and so the first time we got to come back and actually work with musicians in a studio was a kind of emotional time, and it was actually really simple stuff we were doing. It was just a commercial thing, and so I had these violinists and cellists that came back, and it was the first work of any kind they'd had in 6 months. How can you can't live like that? So it was the first one, and I gave them just long notes to play, so it wasn't very interesting for them, but at least they were doing that, and it was quite emotional to do that. So yeah, it's been in and out of lockdowns. Fortunately, my family have been okay. There's been some touches of the disease, but we haven't lost anyone. I know many people have. But yet, I had this project of writing this symphony a little bit every day, just a little bit, half an hour or an hour of work every day, and then walk and do some other work, something that's not music. And that took me through. And I think there's a lot of those feelings went into the piece.
Mm-hmm.
I
think it's a good strategy in order to have a large-scale project and to look upon this in order to go to light.
In terms of writing a large-scale piece, yeah, you have to do a little bit at a time. I think I would go crazy, more crazy, if I worked all day, every day on a piece. I can't do that. Mm-hmm. It's just a little bit every day, because actually your brain is working all the time anyway, thinking about it. I don't know if you feel that. Your brain is constantly working on it. So the hour of time you have in front of a piano and some paper is important time.
This was also an advice of Schoenberg's advice. And he said, always, when I'm not composing, I am writing counterpoint exercises.
Oh, right, no, I don't do enough exercises, yeah. I do lots of playing exercises. Actually, I think an important aspect of this, and why psychologically it was difficult in lockdown, was no playing with other people. I've learnt so much about music from playing. And it's something that sometimes many composers, they make this mistake of never actually playing anything with other people. I don't know actually, I don't know if you do or not, but I make a point to have to play things, string quartets, accompany people on the piano. I'm an organist in a church, so every week. That was the only time we got any live music for miles around. It was organ in the church, no choir because they were silenced. But yeah, we had organ music.
Patrick Horse, you are also an organist.
Yes, yeah. Yes, I am. I took up the organ in my early 20s while I was at university. I love it. I love the fact that the whole body is coordinated. I think it's a great way of soaking up so much music and so much harmonic invention and counterpoint. I think it's a great thing for a composer. I always feel sorry for composers who only play a melodic instrument. They may be happy with it, and they may write great music, but I think it's such an advantage if you've got a sense of harmony as well as melody. And with the organ, you've kind of got that and something else, because the feet are involved with the foundation harmonically, and somehow, therefore, you feel harmony in a much more grounded way. Yeah.
Physically. Almost, yes. And how was this turbulent times for you?
Well, being really selfish, I personally, I was really lucky, and I actually quite enjoyed it. It's a terrible thing to say, but I live with my manager Andy here, who is a wonderful person to live with, and our 3 cats, and I felt very grounded, and I loved the creative space. I loved the fact that I knew I was going to be at home for 2 weeks without having to go into London or whatever. And unlike Tim, my approach to composing is quite different. If I get involved in, say, a piano concerto, it consumes me. So I'm hearing it when I wake up at night, and for me, it's an act of love, and I can't let go of it. Yeah.
Yes.
So I do say, that sounds a bit selfish. I mean, I do think of all professions and areas of our fellow man and women, through COVID, the performing artists have suffered more than anybody. But I would say that for creative artists, it was potentially useful in that it gave lots of creative space.
Yes, it is an unexpected answer you gave, and I imagine that this is internalized, and because myself, for instance, and I know some other colleagues, we couldn't really compose for 5-6 months, even not a note. And of course, we have done I have done some sketches and so on, exercises, melodies, harmonies, transpositions, and so on. But I mean, generating material, but not really being in a mood to compose.
Oh, no. I suppose it helped me that I had the concerto to write, because I had planned on beginning it just as lockdown started, and it worked well for me personally. It might have been very different if I hadn't have had any commissions.
And how was for you as performers? We can imagine.
Well, on a strictly professional level, first the shock of not having your life ruled in like this, which in my case had basically been since I was 19 years old. I've been traveling almost every week, and now I'm 50. So it was quite a shock. Also the energy, of course. I suppose I spent almost 14 months without playing a concert. That's the first time since ever. So you miss not only what you're used to traveling and preparing something, but the energy of being on stage in front of an audience. Of course, I did a few little concerts, maybe with a trio or something. We played just to cameras, a live stream. But to walk out in an empty hall and take a bow to nobody and just play to camera, it's so bizarre. And I think for everybody this experience is very strange. One just tries one's best to survive it somehow. Just the adrenaline and the excitement isn't there, but still you're thinking in the back of your head, actually I'm probably playing to more people than I've ever played to, so you don't know. So on the professional level it was a shock like that. But on a personal level, me and my partner Anastasia, we also live in a very beautiful rural setting, and being in Sweden, we didn't have lockdowns like that. We didn't have to wear masks. So we just locked ourselves in, and if we didn't see people, it was, we were very lucky that way. And also it gave me time, I suppose, to reevaluate many things in my life, which I basically hadn't had time for. I've just been on this track, I don't know what you call it, career track or something. So to spend a lot more time with my instrument, with music, and kind of falling in love with just practicing or not practicing or thinking about music, finding composers that I had never heard of. Spending much more time with interesting repertoire. We, of course, as pianists, particularly blessed, like a conductor with repertoire. We could spend our lives with Beethoven or with Chopin, and that's wonderful, but there's so much fantastic music out there that we don't know about. So I spent 2 years, educating myself in this repertoire, and my recital programs surely will be very different from now on. And of course, to have the great honor to have a wonderful piano concerto written for me and to work on was really a wonderful thing in this difficult time.
Wonderful.
I'm just going to add quickly because
Please.
I felt, as a conductor, I had nothing to do. How can you have a 100-piece orchestra? So I must admit I felt very jealous of my colleagues who could play something at least. Of course I could play the piano a little bit, but this isn't what I got into this business for. I need to be communicating with orchestra, feeling an orchestra, and selling it to the public, if you like. So it just really got me down. And I had to step away from music completely. I couldn't listen to anything. At the beginning I thought, I can learn some or look at some scores I haven't had a chance to look at. I couldn't touch it. And I had this sense of everybody else is able to do something apart from me. So I felt a little bit bitter.
Frustration.
Actually. Yeah, very frustrating. And then I thought, my composer friends, at least they can compose. My musician friend, instrumentalists, they can play something. But once I got over that, I started to unwind a little bit, and actually, as Peter said, just to enjoy the time at home. I've never spent so many days in my own bed. It's rather nice, and actually seeing the children for a change. So it puts everything into perspective, as we know. This traveling, carousel, continual traveling. It was nice to actually not do that, and then things started creeping back in, and one starts to feel it again. But usually I'm conducting an orchestra almost every week, so not having them there, even preparing for my first concert back after the long time, I didn't know how it was going to work because I haven't had anyone to do it with. You could not be able to. I was worried I wasn't be able to connect with the orchestra, or and there's only so much sort of exercises you can do. You need the people there, so it was a very, very strange time for me, and at least now we hopefully begin to do it again.
We hope also, yes. So, are some questions from the audience? Yes, please.
I have a question for Patrick. Your talk was very powerful and honest, and I think it resonated especially with me and us students in general, because we especially have this feeling of trying to prove ourselves intellectually to our professors, to the world, to ourselves. And yeah, my question for you is, do you have any specific techniques that you use to assess yourself if you're using your mind too much when you're composing, or to know that you're on the right track somehow? How do you know?
No, thank you, and thank you for asking me that question. I think none of this is manufactured in any way within me. It's my philosophy, if you like, and way of working has evolved over time. And if I was to have given this talk 10 years ago, it would probably have been different. But to be very open, I was talking to Maria just now, and we were talking about prayer. Now, of course, that's something which people with a religious belief can only understand, but it helps to explain and answer to your question that those who believe pray. But it wasn't until the age of about 40, and it was actually as a result of a talk that my brother gave, who's a priest, that I realized I was praying with my mind. And I suddenly discovered I could pray from here. And that realization made me realize too that I am a person who feels in life a lot. What I mean is that in me, in any case, things are channeled through here, much more than through here, which is why I walk into lampposts, say, or why I've got only this shirt is the clean shirt, because I've got food over every other T-shirt, because my mind is very much disengaged a lot of the time. And then, I suppose, over the last decade, I've realized this all-important question of the balance between the mind and the soul. And it's enabled me, therefore, to be able to understand my own music more and have more faith in it, because I can see what's happening. My mind enables that, of course. But I'm now at a stage, at the age of 62, where I am who I am. As I said to you earlier, of course it's important. We've got to learn the language of music. I was talking about it being a language. And it takes a long time to do that. And I was resident composer for a while at Charterhouse. It's a very good school in England with very talented young musicians, aged between 12 and 18. It's the old school of Ralph Vaughan Williams, so it has a very strong tradition. And of course, I had to teach them techniques. I used to take them to concerts of contemporary music, and I had to really understand it. And I think that's very important. But I think, and therefore I'm in a luckier position to you. I've been through all that and done that. But a composer must, before anything else, know the language of music. They must be able to feel G-flat major. They must be able just to know what the submediant of F-sharp minor is and just feel it in that thorough. And they need to know what Bach did and Beethoven did, and they need to know what modern techniques are. And then develop your soul. Because you will automatically use your mind. Because as I was saying, since the Enlightenment, we've more and more become entrapped within it. So that's fine, you will use it anyway. But if you can just bring a little bit of this, then you'd be amazed at how it transforms your creativity.
Another question?
For the composers, is there any sort of challenge you face in your writing process? And if not, what was when you had some challenge, and how did you overcome it in your composition writing process?
You go first.
Am I on? Yeah, right. So I wanted to disagree slightly with what you said. I'll answer your question in a moment, but can I just answer yours briefly? I think you do need to prove yourself intellectually, to be honest. And the reason is, you've got to, I mean, Patrick's right in that we need to understand lots of things about the past. There's a huge amount of technique that you need to master as a composer. You need to understand, ideally, how every instrument you're going to write for is played, which is not easy to do, and you need to understand this from other people. So I think you do need to prove yourself intellectually, and the reason is beyond that, because then you're not going to be kind of copying other people. You're going to be knowing what you want to say yourself, and you're going to be saying it because you understand a huge number of things, and you've learned not just in music or in literature, but of history, lots of other things. You need to have a magpie mind. I don't know if you have this expression in Romanian, magpies that steal everything, that go and look for lots of things. But yeah, I think you do need to prove yourself intellectually. And prove has two meanings in English. It means also to test. And you want to constantly test yourself intellectually. I think this is important for a composer, because you need to understand why, you need to know what you're saying, you need to know why you're saying it, and you need to know when you're going to disagree with someone else, because you have to do that a lot as a composer, I think. Right, writer's block, things like this. Problems when you're wanting to compose. Yeah, I think sometimes you don't know what you're going to write, and you think, I procrastinate, everyone procrastinates. If you're going to write something, you find something else to do, you're going to go outside, you're going to go and have a drink and make some more tea, then you're going to go outside, then you're going to have some tea, then you're going to go outside, then you're going to go check your emails. So I think that actually, and then there's this blank piece of paper facing you constantly like a demon. For me, my sort of one weird trick, whatever, I like to put constraints. Say, right, okay, I'm only going to do one bar, or I'm only going to write for these three instruments, or something like that, some constraints. I think Stravinsky said that the blank page for him was like a terrifying abyss, that he was terrified of the blank page, because there are no constraints. You fall into it, you fall. I think you have to have constraints to give yourself. And that could be time. Another good thing if you're struggling to write is say, I'm only going to give myself. I had this problem actually. I couldn't write anything, and a friend of mine, also a composer, said, try this. Put an alarm on your phone. Sit down in front of a piano, in front of the thing, write for 5 minutes, and then the alarm goes off and you have to stop. But I can't write, so you sit down and then you look at the page for 5 minutes and do nothing, and then the alarm goes off, and you're just about to do something, but you have to force yourself to stop, and you have to take 5 minutes, and you come back. I'm going to write something, this idea I had in 5 minutes. The alarm goes off, and you have to stop. And by starving yourself in this way, actually, you can write more. There's a little trick I use sometimes when I'm blocked.
Could you just repeat the question?
About the challenges in the writing process, not necessarily composer's block, but that too, sure. But musically, I was thinking, I don't know, in your process, whatever it means for you.
Yeah. In the past, when I first started to write music, my biggest enemy and problem was self-doubt. And this meant that I would very often, if I look back at the manuscript books I have from 30 years ago, then of course they're full of crossing out and various ideas for a theme and so on. What I began to realize, though, very often is that, and I bet this will ring true with a lot of you, is I'd end up going back to my very first idea. And I think that's very important as composers, to trust that first idea. I've got to the point now where I will go with it. I will go with it. I particularly love setting words to music. And I find that the words write the music. I will read a poem, and in a way, the composer's a bit of a fraud. He's just an intermediary, or she, because the words suggest a rhythm, the phraseology of the poetry suggests a musical phrase, and so on. So I'm at a stage now where I feel my creative tank is full. This has a lot to do with the spiritual, harnessing the mind, I feel. I feel if I was more, if it was the other way round, I think the mind would be problematic for me and would get in the way and would sow seeds of doubt. The soul doesn't sow seeds of doubt. The other thing I've realized about the difference between the two is that the mind craves innovation. Intellectual approach too, of course. But I think this is one of the symptoms of post-Enlightenment art. And for it to be post-Enlightenment, it has to be a good 100 or 150 years after the middle of the 18th century, because the effects of the Enlightenment, the profound effects of it, we've only just really experienced in the last 100 years. But I think the soul just craves nourishment. And because of that, the creative tank is always full. Because as long as you want to nourish the soul, there will always be something there to nourish it with. Anyway, yeah. I know it's a very different approach to Tim's. I know we couldn't be like chalk and cheese. But such is the state of 21st century music. What I would say is that I don't think we can just be driven by innovation anymore. You can only innovate up to a certain point. For me, it's like being at the tip of a mountain. We've tried, we're looking round. What are we going to, let's innovate, innovate, innovate. I think there's nothing wrong with turning back and going back down that mountain and revisiting the terrific, tremendous, rich, enriching, profound musical heritage we all have. But of course, as we come down the mountain, we see it from a different perspective. It isn't the same. And we shouldn't be afraid of looking back. Bach looked back to Buxtehude. Yeah? Beethoven looked to Haydn, and Brahms looked to Beethoven, and so on. We mustn't be afraid of looking back. And I think that is one of the key features of what this new art form I was talking about, of the third decade, of the third millennium. I think that's one of its key characteristics. Yeah.
Something you said, a very cool thing he said, actually. You said you had your manuscript book, and then you cross things out, loads of ideas, and then you go back to the first one. So important, never throw anything away. And I like to use a piece of paper, and I use pencil and paper, and I use a computer much later in the process. But one thing I have seen students do, particularly younger composers, very young, like 16, 17, this kind of age, they will go away 1 week and they say, well, just make a start, write something. They'll write something on a computer, on Sibelius or something like this, and they come back and they show you nothing. Well, what happened? Oh, I started, I didn't like it, so I deleted it. It's lost forever. You've got to. You don't use a computer, I think, in the writing process until. I mean, I know you do, but it's. You also use paper because you said you did. Pencil and paper. I think it's good to keep things and to cross them out, but don't throw them away. There's about 2 minutes of music of my symphony which isn't in it anymore, but I still have it. I might use it for something else, but it didn't belong there.
It's a sort of déjà vu of my composition lessons with them. We can get another question, the final. Yes, Maria?
So I have a question for all of you, a prepared question. At this very moment in your life, do you still have questions about who you are as an artist? Do you still have doubts about your talent and the way of expression in art? Or you are just trying to show the world what is inside you, what is your vision?
Okay,
Being
Roman.
supposedly overconfident conductor. We aren't all these powerful tyrants. So my levels of confidence and self-doubt change the whole time, and I'm constantly questioning. And in fact, it's something that I spend most rehearsals as well doing, questioning everything that's happening. Of course, is what I'm doing affecting the orchestra? Am I the cause? In fact, the first person I question is myself on every time I stop or think about something in a rehearsal. So, was that me? No, I don't think it was. I think it could be played better by the whatever. And so it's like this needle always for me going up and down. And sometimes the confidence is very high, and then that's fine. And sometimes it's rather low, but it's always in balance with something else coming from the other side. So I'm in a state of flux constantly, and I think that's what keeps my appetite for doing it. I couldn't bear being too comfortable, because then perhaps there's a danger of ending up, we call it phoning in a performance, and I would never want to phone in a performance. So there's always some quest. There should always be something at the back of your mind. That's how I feel.
How is your confidence level today?
Well, yeah, it's interesting.
Because you seem very confident.
I'm confident in knowing the music and what I want to do with it and how it should go. But you know, there are things that can be out of your hands, and that can be very frustrating as a conductor, where you know, anyone can make a mistake and come in a bar early or whatever. But so that should not knock your confidence. But I always say you should be like a Formula One driver. If you're thinking about what happened back there, you are going to screw up the next corner. So you just have to put everything that goes in the back of your mind and try to focus on the thing you set out to do. Yeah,
Right.
but I was very positive about today's before we started, and so I would say 90% confident. But I have to give the impression of 100.
Then
Impossible and great question. I think one is always searching for some kind of truth. I don't know if one will ever find it, but one has to always keep looking. And I think for me, actually, in a very strange way, the last 2 years, I think have helped me that way. I had to take time out from, you know, you have to, like Ruben said, put on a certain amount of confidence / arrogance when you go on stage, just because, you know, anything can really happen. You have to be sure of what you're doing, even though you're not really, because things can. And also, like with Patrick, we played a concerto in a very different way when we played it in Timișoara, even just the beginning of the bar. So there's this juxtaposition of creator, recreator, creator. In a way, I mean, Patrick left a beautiful concerto, but we could have done very different things with it today. It would have been a very different work. So I think one has to always keep looking. It's a balance between confidence and search, always, for me.
When it comes to doubt and self-questioning and so on, I've had enough of that. I was eaten alive with self-doubt. This isn't the time or the place to go into my life history, but I'm a very different Patrick Hawes than I was 30 years ago, even 20 years ago, when I had no confidence whatsoever. And I think if you've been through that, those very dark places, and you come out the other end, then it's relatively easy to hold your head high. Not with arrogance, but with a sense of joy. And I am now at the stage where I don't doubt myself one iota. I question within the composition process that I do allow my mind, and in fact it's a constant undercurrent of questioning and in acquisitiveness. What if I'd have spaced this chord differently? What if I'd have given this solo to the oboe, or supported it with the second flute? It's a constant sort of almost machine, the mental side, going on. But that's a healthy sort of questioning, I believe. So long may it last. You know, long may it last. I write music, I say to people, for love, out of love. Take it as you leave it. And part of that love is love of myself and a love of the music I write. It's the music I've wanted to hear, so I write it.
Tim?
So yeah, what happens in my mind, I don't really want to tell you much about that. I don't think you want to know. It's a dark place sometimes. And yeah, I struggle very much with all this kind of thing. But yeah, it sort of returns to some of the themes that we've discussed. The need to. So I've kind of stopped caring a bit about what people think, and I think you need to do this as a composer and an intellectual. I suppose you need to go through. You'll go through so many stages of doing the things that people expect you to do, and then you write kind of. Dare we say we write some modernist music because that's what you're told to do in a university sometimes, but then some people that becomes the thing they want to do, and they want to challenge it and change it and evolve it. But that's a different conversation. I want to have this conversation in the pub with you about this modernism. You missed what he said, but it was very interesting, and we must talk about it some more. But yeah, confidence. I get kind of angry about things I see in the world, and I want to kind of change them, and I want to speak, and I want to tell stories that I think might persuade people to change or to challenge, for sure. But yeah, confidence I think comes from no longer really caring about what other people kind of think about you. You have to stop. People will always judge you, but that's what they want to do. Don't care. That allows you to then be a bit more confident, I think. Does that answer what you were saying, what you wanted to know?
Okay, thank you, Roman Gamba, Peter Jablonski, Patrick Horse, and Tim Benjamin. Thank you for your presence and for your sharing your thoughts here with us. Thank you.